It was time for Toronto to drown in the sweet sorrow of the clash at Dreamhead!
Salutations! Happy Halloween from cold and cloudy Northern California. My name is Envy Adams, and today we're going to talk about and explore LGBTQ plus themes in the horror genre. These themes in horror are about how films showcase gay, lesbian, trans, and other queer people and ideas. Historically, horror films are a place to show what society worries about. And because people have feared LGBTQ plus identities and anything that challenges straight traditional life, these worries often get turned into scary monsters, killers, or villains, known as the other in the film. Since these themes were seen as a threat to straight audiences, they were usually hidden and could possibly be found by looking closer at the story. Film scholar and expert Harry Benshoff, as quoted in Monsters in the Closet, Homosexuality and the Horror Film by the Manchester United Press of 1997, postulated that there are four main ways LGBTQ plus themes show up in horror movies. So I'm going to discuss those four main ways, and I'm also going to go through some examples, and also I'm going to go through whether the creator of this work acknowledged those LGBTQ plus themes. The first one that we're going to talk about, it just means that the characters are openly queer within the story's world. So, one example is the Fear Street trilogy from 2021, which I have not seen, but I did read the synopsis and I went through some of the quotes from the creator. So, the Fear Street trilogy has the main protagonists, Dina and Sam, and they are explicitly a lesbian couple. Their whole relationship is the central emotional plot point for all of the horror and time traveling situations that are going on. It is sort of stated that their love is the motivation for fighting this curse that they have throughout the trilogy. So the director Lee identifies as queer, and they explicitly acknowledged that the central love story between Dina and Sam was the heart of the trilogy and was written as an attempt to fix the bury your gays trope in horror, according to interviews in Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. Another example is the Chucky TV series of 2021. The show features two gay teen protagonists, Jake and Devon, and Chucky's offspring, Glenn and Glenda, that were introduced in the Seed of Chucky, are confirmed in this series to be gender fluid. And both Chucky and Tiffany are accepting parents, but it reminds me there's that meme where Chucky's like, gender fluid.
I have a queer kid.
You have a kid,
Gender fluid.
and you're cool with it.
I'm not a monster, Jake.
So this was explicitly acknowledged by the creator Don Mancini, who is openly gay, and he's consistently centered queer characters and themes in the franchise since the 1990s, according to interviews in The Guardian and Entertainment Weekly. Another way that these themes show up in horror films and the genre are that the works were made by an LGBTQ plus person, the writer, the director, etc. This focuses on the creator's identity shaping the work regardless of the character's explicit sexuality. One example of this is the 2014 horror film The Babadook. This film was created by a lesbian filmmaker who wrote and directed the film. Although the film doesn't feature openly queer characters, many critics and fans read the film as a horror story about the stifling nature of single motherhood and mental health. Its later adoption as a gay icon and camp figure. However, this example is largely unacknowledged by the creator, Jennifer Kent. They've stated that the film is about a mother's repressed grief and mental health, and she didn't really intend to create a gay icon, according to interviews in Entertainment Weekly. Another example is the Hellraiser franchise. The work originates from a gay author. The entire franchise is based on The Hellbound Heart by openly gay author Clive Barker. His work is noted for blending intense pain and pleasure, often exploring boundary-pushing themes that deeply resonate with queer perspectives on desire. This has been explicitly acknowledged by the author Clive Barker. He stated that his work, including Hellraiser, is deeply infused with themes of transgressive desire, pain, and pleasure that resonate with non-normative sexuality. He's stated that horror is a genre where he can explore fantasies often repressed in mainstream society. According to the Dark Fantastic Interviews with Master of Horror by Michael Collins of 2002, another way that these themes show up in horror films is by using subcontext, either hidden meanings or clues, which could involve a subcontext where the monster or villain is associated with non-heterosexual or non-cisgender traits. One example is 2009 Jennifer's Body. The relationship between Jennifer and her best friend Needy is intense and sexually charged, and because of this, the film has been claimed by the queer community as a cult classic film. This was somewhat acknowledged by the writer Diablo Cody and director Karen Kusama. They've both acknowledged the queer subcontext and the intense, almost romantic relationship between Jennifer and Needy, according to interviews with BuzzFeed News and Vulture. Another way that these themes show up in horror films is that LGBTQ plus fans find that specific meaning in the story. One example of this is 2014 It Follows. The overall theme of the movie, stated by the director David Robert Mitchell, is that the film is an allegory for the anxiety surrounding STDs. And because of this, the queer audiences took that allegory as an example of a social contagion of queer identity. But that connection has been unacknowledged by the director, according to an interview with Collider of 2015. Another example is 2021 Malignant. Fans read the main character, Madison, and her parasitic twin, Gabriel, through the lens of gender and trauma. Gabriel is revealed to be like a tumor that's attached to Madison's like head or spine, and the entity Gabriel acts out extreme violence. And because of this, Gabriel is often interpreted as a visual metaphor for trauma, shame, or unconventional identity. And that's what really helped queer audiences relate to. Now, this connection has been unacknowledged by the director James Wan. He has, however, stated that the film is meant to be over the top and campy, which is aiming to be inspired by Italian horror films, late 80s, early 90s serial killer stories, with the central theme being a sisterly sibling connection, according to an interview with Sci-Fi Now in 2021. So now I'm going to go a little bit through the history of horror films tied in with the LGBTQ plus themes throughout history. The first horror films in the 1910s were adaptations of Gothic novels that often featured coded LGBTQ plus themes, which horror cinema used to make the homosexual person seem monstrous. So kind of like how we talked about earlier with like them being the other, or them kind of representing the non-heterosexual characters that are meant to scare the audience. So this imagery was strengthened by the German expressionist movement in the 1920s. Gay director F.W. Murnau of Nosferatu frequently challenged social normalcy, which was attacked by the Nazis for its connection to groups like homosexuals and other social deviants. Vaudeville was a cultural precursor and early source of film talent and inspiration that featured many openly queer themes through cross-dressing, largely because it had no strict censorship. When the culture and its queer workers entered the new film industry, Big Hollywood was worried that this would challenge traditional gender roles and would become too public. So in order to halt the spread, the Motion Picture Production Code was created, which governed the production of most U.S. motion pictures released by major studios from 1930 to 1968, and this was in order to regulate themes that were seen on screen by audiences. This code, however, was abandoned in 1968 and was replaced by the current MPAA film rating system. So that's like rated G, rated PG, PG 13. So heavy censorship actually fueled the horror genre. So simple character pairings like masculine and feminine or master and servant became ways to secretly show LGBTQ plus themes. This allowed these themes to appear coded on screen by connecting them to more acceptable issues like the racial tension between white and non-white characters. In 1930, the Hays Code was enacted, banning homosexuality without explicitly naming it, quoted as sex perversion or any interference of it is forbidden. This rule reflected the era's fear that homosexuality threatened the strict gender roles emphasized during the Great Depression. The Production Code Administration was then launched in 1934 to enforce the code strictly. So, some examples during this time were 1931 Frankenstein by James Whale. The story uses the novel's original hidden meanings to suggest that the monster is a queer child and Dr. Frankenstein is a rejecting parent. That film, as well as 1935 Bride of Frankenstein, suggests hidden homosexual relationships, which Mr. Benshoff calls the domestic queer couple. Another example is 1936 Dracula's Daughter. This shows a clash of gender roles with a masculine countess and her feminine male servant. But the film is most significant for using the lesbian vampire trope. Now, during the Cold War, films changed from monster movies to scary alien invasion stories. This shift reflected a growing fear among heterosexual Americans of the hidden homosexual. This fear was fueled by the Red Scare, everyone's a communist scare, and the Lavender Scare, which is just the fear of homosexuals, which included old wartime beliefs that gay people were secretly living a lie and somehow could infect straight soldiers. Horror films in this era that contained LGBTQ plus theme followed a sort of rule that heterosexuality and normalcy had to be restored by the final scene. This was usually achieved by killing off the characters that were coded as queer, uniting the straight couples, and generally enforcing traditional straight standards. Horror films also often connected homosexual characters to public threats. Films in the 1980s and early 90s used the figure of the evil homosexual to represent the era's major public fear, which was the widespread HIV and AIDS epidemic that swept across the Western world. The initial confusion about AIDS and HIV led many people to wrongly blame the LGBTQ plus community for the disease, and this resulted in the demonization and isolation of gay men who were falsely seen as intentionally infecting others. The vampires' historical ties to plagues and the importance of blood made it easy to connect the monster to the spread of HIV and AIDS. This idea appeared in 1985 Fright Night and 1987 The Lost Boys. The connection was also made explicit in 1998 Blade, where a vampire character is referred to as a sexually transmitted disease. Many see 1982 The Thing as an allegory for the spread of HIV and AIDS. The film's main terror comes from not being able to identify who is infected. The behavior of an all-male crew who drink and use drugs mirrors the media's idea that gay men were guilty of contracting AIDS because of their promiscuous lifestyle. Other horror movies from that time in 1985, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, showed explicit homophobia and included the casual use of anti-gay slurs, which reinforced negative attitudes towards the LGBTQ plus community. Some horror films, despite lacking obvious LGBTQ plus content, were interpreted by viewers through the lens of the HIV and AIDS epidemic. For instance, the 1986 film The Hitcher was directly connected to this fear in a contemporary review, which called it a slasher movie about gay panic, a nasty piece of homophobic angst for the age of AIDS. Ultimately, the history of LGBTQ plus themes in horror cinema isn't just a grim timeline of shame and coded violence. It's a testament to the power of queer resilience. As we've learned for decades, censorship and gatekeeping tried to use horror as a morality play, aiming to make the monster a clear warning to a straight audience. As horror movies are now moving towards open celebration of queer themes, this history proves that even the old attempts by big Hollywood to define who is normal or to create the fearful other ultimately failed, instead giving rise to some of cinema's most beloved and iconic figures. I appreciate y'all for watching this video. Share this video with the monster in your closet. Like the video to become a boy-eating monster, and comment what your favorite examples of LGBTQ plus themes in horror are. Gotta go.